Jeff, this is a lovely little spot here in Dover, New Hampshire.
Yeah, it definitely is. So right now we're walking behind a massive complex of buildings that includes an old folks home, the Strafford County Department of Corrections, and there's paths to walk down to the banks of the Cocheco River, plenty of trees, but our destination is up this small hill on our left.
All right. Well, I see what looks like a kind of headstone monument with an urn on the top.
Yep, that's the spot. It was near here that a horrible tragedy claimed a lot of lives. I know we often need to put tragic events behind us in order to move on, but at least we sometimes leave some kind of memorial behind to the fallen. It's something to say they lived here and died here, and hopefully they didn't die in vain.
Yeah, I know what you mean. We can't mourn anything forever, but we should also never forget. It's tough to know where the balance is.
Yeah, it definitely is. Now, quite often, the most vulnerable people in our communities are the first stories to be lost to history. We're here to check out one such story. We're in Dover, New Hampshire, to visit the site of the Dover Insane Asylum fire. I'm Jeff Belanger.
And I'm Ray Auger. Welcome to episode 354 of the New England Legends podcast. And thanks for joining us on our mission to chronicle every legend in New England one story at a time. It's a mission we can't accomplish without you. So please contact us through our website anytime with your story leads. We love hearing from you.
Also, Ray and I are thrilled to announce we're holding our first New England Legends podcast live event.
Yes.
Saturday, September 21st, 7 p.m. in Milford, Massachusetts.
Exciting.
It's going to be amazing. A night of stories, live music, general weirdness. Now, our discounted Patreon patron presale has ended, so now tickets are on sale for everyone. They're only $20, but limited, and you can buy them through our website.
Now, we'll explore this Dover tragedy right after a word from our sponsor.
There was a time when most counties were required to manage a poor farm. It was a place that was meant to be as self-sufficient as possible, where the inmates, as they were called, could grow their own food, make their own clothes, and not be a burden on the community. It was a place for those who couldn't take care of themselves, either from physical or mental disabilities, or widows and people of advanced years who just couldn't be on their own anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds reasonable.
And it was. And the system worked, to varying degrees. Some poor farms were better run than others, of course. Some did require communities to pony up extra taxes to pay and care for these folks. And some people in those communities didn't like that one bit. Later on, many poor farms turned into asylums that mostly focused on people with mental disabilities. That system also had a pretty good run, all the way up until the 1980s, when deinstitutionalization shut down many of the state-run mental health facilities, which led to a dramatic rise in our homeless and prison populations, because some folks simply can't make it on their own. They need to be in some kind of institution.
That is so tragic.
Yeah.
So here's a little more information on Dover, New Hampshire. Dover is technically a seacoast town with its southeastern edge sitting near where the Piscataqua River meets the Atlantic Ocean. This region, that was once Abenaki land, was first settled by Europeans in 1623. The town built up on the back of the fishing industry. As farms and more businesses moved in, the population grew, and they needed a poor farm.
Right. A place for people who can't take care of themselves.
Dover's poor farm was built on land purchased from a man named Timothy Snell and sat next to John Trickey's farm by the Cocheco River. Next to the poor farm, an asylum building was built. The institution featured 56 cells and a 2.5-story wooden building with windows covered with metal bars and screening to keep people inside from escaping. In 1866, the county took control of the poor farm and focused more on the care of, quote, incurable insane paupers. This facility wasn't without its controversy, though. In the latter half of the 1800s, boarding each pauper cost the town about $1.50 per week. That would be about $36 in today's money.
So, not too much.
No, not at all. But multiply that by 50 people, and you're looking at about $1,800 a week in today's money.
Which is still pennies considering you're housing and feeding 50 people.
And multiply that by 52 weeks, and you have some locals who don't believe they should have to foot the bill for these people. The pressure was on. So at times, the town selectmen tried to push some of the homeless into other jurisdictions and counties so they became someone else's problem.
So that was the struggle with the poor farm and asylum in the late 1800s. Let's head back to 1893 and visit Dover.
It's early February of 1893. It's been bitterly cold out lately here in Dover, New Hampshire. The cold conditions are amplified inside the Strafford County Lunatic Asylum. The asylum is its own building, while the workhouse sits about 60 feet away in another building.
Now, the way the asylum was constructed, there are gaps between the floorboards to the point where you can see through to the different levels.
The building is definitely drafty, not well insulated, and the people inside sometimes shiver from the cold.
But that's life inside the asylum. It's not meant to be a life of luxury, but it is meant to help people survive when they have nowhere else to go, and to help these folks live a fuller life, which is helpful considering it wasn't that long ago that people with mental disorders or disabilities were either locked up in prisons or chained up in the attics or basements by their families who were too embarrassed to have these family members be seen by the public.
It's Thursday evening, February 9th. The winter storm outside has been building for hours. It's cold, the wind is whipping, and the snow is falling in almost whiteout conditions.
It's about 10 p.m. when night watchman Wilburn Chisley gets up to make his rounds. Chisley hears something coming from one of the cells. As he draws closer, he smells something unmistakable.
Smoke!
Definitely smoke. It's coming from that room over there where they're holding Mary LaFontaine. When Chisley draws closer, he can see flames leaping inside of the cell. And now there's panic. The woman inside has barricaded herself inside the burning room.
The night watchman struggles with the door and tries to pull the inmate out of her burning cell. With the door open, it's clear this fire is spreading quickly to the other cells. The other inmates are trapped in their cells as smoke and fire start to pour in.
The night watchman panics. He sounds the alarm. Mr. William Driscoll, the keeper, and the attendants rush to the second floor where most of the inmates sleep. As they desperately try to unlock all the doors and rouse the inmates, it's soon clear they're doomed. Flames are spreading everywhere. People are trapped.
Someone from the workhouse next door saw the flames outside and was already racing into downtown Dover to summon the fire brigade. The fire wagon is quickly hitched and soon en route to the fire at the asylum, but the going is painfully slow considering the winter storm and blinding, slippery conditions.
Meanwhile, back at the asylum, the scene is true horror. Screams can be heard coming from the building, as well as maniacal laughter. Some inmates are even singing, unaware of the peril they're in. One pauper from the workhouse next door describes the scene.
The flames are spreading with such rapidity that the building is one seething, hissing mass of fire. The blaze seems to fill many of the demented people with ghoulish ideas. I saw women standing before the windows making the most hideous faces. Even while the flames tip their cheeks, the tongues of flames leap about the skulls and bones of the cremated insane. The cries of the doomed prisoners were heart-rending. Hideous laughter mingled with prayers and appeals for help.
It's close to midnight when the fire brigade arrives, but it's clear they're far too late. The building is engulfed in flames. When morning comes, officials can see there are bones and charred bodies everywhere. Figuring out which bones belong to which inmate is going to be impossible. They can only guess based on where the bones were found.
3 people from the asylum managed to escape through one of the windows that weren't barred. In the end, 41 people perished in the worst fire in state history. And that brings us back to today. We should point out that there is some discrepancy on the number. Some say it was 41 people who perished, others say 40. Either way, it's one of the biggest fire tragedies in New Hampshire state history. The building was leveled, and eventually a new facility made of brick was built on these very grounds. Those are the buildings we see around us today. And though the original asylum that burned to the ground was situated where a section of the new building now resides, this memorial is placed over here just in sight of it.
After a full investigation, authorities determined many problems that led to this tragedy. First, the inmates who smoked were allowed to have matches. Mary LaFontaine smoked on occasion, so she had the matches. Second, the night watchman, Mr. Chesley, by his own admission, claimed he was unfit for the job. He had poor eyesight and didn't know or wasn't told there was a water hose and a fire bucket nearby. Neither were used to fight the blaze when it was still contained to one room. They also found the construction of the building was poor, and the wood went up like a tinderbox. In short, the state and county failed these people, and they died.
Today, the monument reads, "In memory of those who lost their lives in the burning of the Strafford County Asylum, February 9th, 1893.
Thankfully, this tragedy hasn't been repeated in New Hampshire, which gives us hope that maybe a painful lesson was learned.
And that takes us to After the Legend, where we dive deeper into this week's story and sometimes veer off course.
After the Legend is brought to you by our Patreon patrons. Our Patreon patrons support everything we do. Without them, the podcast wouldn't be possible. They help us with our production and hosting costs, with our marketing, and everything else that it takes to bring you 2 stories each week. It's just $3 per month, and for that, they get early ad-free access to new episodes, plus bonus episodes and content that no one else gets to hear. And they get discounts to our events. If you can help the cause, please head over to patreon.com/New England Legends.
And to see some historic photos of the Dover Poor Farm and Asylum, click on the link in our episode description or go to our website and click on episode 353. So, always a balance, right, between honoring and memorializing a horrible tragedy and forgetting about it, which I know just sounds so appalling.
Yeah.
So I was listening recently to an interview with Linda Kinsler. She's a junior fellow at Harvard. Anyway, so she was talking about the concept of oblivion. And oblivion is the act of collectively forgetting about tragic events, any tragic event.
Okay.
So I know it sounds horrible, right? 9/11, right? I mean, Sandy Hook, like so many things, right? So I don't mean completely forgetting, but you can only mourn so hard and so long.
Right. But you need a reminder from time to time.
Right.
Which I don't think we remind ourselves as much as we should. I think TV news broadcasts will remind us when we need to remember.
Anniversaries.
Yeah.
Right? Like, oh, it's been this many years or whatever. Yep.
But if it was left to us, I think we would live in oblivion.
So Sandy Hook is one that's more personal for me, right?
Sure.
I attended Sandy Hook Elementary School as a kid, grew up there. My parents lived in the same house until just a few years ago, just a mile from the school. And so I was very close to that tragedy when it happened. And I remember my parents, and I didn't live in Sandy Hook. I was living in Massachusetts at the time of the mass murder. But I remember my parents telling me for like a year after, it was like being at a funeral for a year.
Sure.
You know, funerals are somber occasions. Like even if you're not super close to the person in the box, you bring your somber self in support of the people you're there to visit, friends or whatever. And now obviously when we say oblivion, by the way, we're not talking about those directly affected. If you lost a kid, if you lost a spouse or something like that, like obviously that's a whole different ballgame for you.
Right.
We're not suggesting at all that you ever forget or will ever repair from that. Of course not. We're talking about the rest of us who watched it on the news, didn't know anyone directly affected, but are just human beings going, oh my God, what a horrible thing.
Because we all have kids, or most of us, and you can feel for the parents that lost children.
Of course. But I remember my dad saying, he's like, you go to the grocery store, just the mood. No one's allowed to smile or laugh. It just feels like you're just at the funeral all the time. And it's really hard. Like, how do we move on from this thing? And at some point, the town had to collectively decide, like, okay, this we'll never forget. It'll always be part of us. Our name will be synonymous with this tragedy forever. But we do have to go on. We have to laugh again. We have to like make good memories. That doesn't honor the fallen to like be sad the rest of your life, you know? But so that balance is something that, and that's the thing about grief, right? Everybody grieves differently. There are people that put the grief off till later. Like right now they're happy and joking around. Everything's fine. And 6 months from now, they're going to fall apart. Right. Other people grieve right now and they grieve hard for like weeks and then get it out.
Did you ever hear comedians talk about the fallen fellow comedians, somebody that just may have died?
Oh, sure.
They will make fun of them. They will. I mean, that could be one of the best funerals to be at is a comedian's funeral.
Yeah.
Because everyone's ripping on this guy or this girl.
Yeah.
But, you know, obviously they go home, they shut the door, and they're probably bawling their eyes out.
Of course.
Do you remember SNL during 9/11 when that happened? Like weeks later, they had the mayor on, and Lauren said, "Can we be funny again?" And he said, "Why start now?
Why start now?"
But that was Lauren Michaels saying, it's time.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm sure all the late night talk show guys said the same thing because nobody knew what to do for weeks after that.
We don't have a playbook for this.
I mean, I was on the radio at the time. I went in, I didn't know what I was going to do. I was on vacation.
Yeah.
And I went right back to work and I'm like, what do we do?
We talk.
And I played no music and I talked. That's it. I opened up the phone lines.
Yep.
I asked people to send me emails that I could read on the air.
Yep.
For a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. And then we decided at one point, it's time to not move on, obviously.
Right.
But, you know, start what we were doing before this happened.
New normal.
Yeah. We hear that all the time now, unfortunately.
Well, when
the pandemic.
The
new normal.
When you lose a loved one, if you lose a spouse, a child, a parent, you'll never get over it.
And life changes too. Your routine changes. So you do have a new normal.
You have a new normal.
Yeah.
And yes, you will laugh again. You will, do all those things. But this story I think is important because, 9/11 got plenty of ink. So did Sandy Hook. These were poor people with disabilities that were literally forgotten and put away.
That's a good point.
And so this was, it still got plenty of news, by the way. Even back then, by the New York Times did big features on it. Like, this was a big, important news story. But these are people that didn't really have a name. Of course they had a name, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They weren't, they were literally...
They weren't part of the community, really.
Nope.
They were behind bars.
Locked away.
Yeah.
And not behind bars for criminal activity.
No,
just because they couldn't take care of themselves.
Yeah.
And as the state pointed out, we only pointed out a few of the bullet points that they said went wrong. There were others. It just, we're getting into minutia now, right?
Nobody cared about this house. It's a poor house.
Right. It's a poor house. Just build it as quickly as you can, as cheaply as you can, because also there's pressure from the community. And hey, it's no different then than it is now. Why should I have to take care of those people?
Well, all these things turned into Section 8. Right.
Well,
not all these things. That poorhouse turns into Section 8 once they started getting rid of the poorhouses. That kind of housing, we still complain about that. There's Section 8 housing coming into my community? I don't want that. And you go to the selectmen meetings, and it's the same thing that happened then.
Yep.
Is happening now.
I don't care if my taxes go up $1. It's $1 too much. Why should I have to take care of others?
Right.
And that's an attitude that gets carried around. Deinstitutionalization does not get talked about enough. That was the 1980s when they said, hey, we've got medicine now and everything else, and we don't need these giant expensive facilities. And sure, medication did help some people and probably got them onto a track where they could work and live and whatever. But some people need to be in an institution.
Sure.
There were people with mental disabilities that went out and just committed a crime so they could be in prison.
Yeah.
Because prison is routine and simple and
somebody's caring for you.
Yeah. And if you let me out in 2 years, what do I do with the least amount of damage to get back in here?
Right.
Because I can't be on my own.
Or cause too much damage to stay in there.
Right. And then the homeless population. There's people that just are incapable. And I know that's hard for some folks to understand, but they don't have it.
Yeah. Mental illness is a thing.
It is a thing. It is a thing. And they don't have it to take care of themselves. And it seems horribly awful to suggest that, well, then die. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What can we do? What's the balance between, of course, no one wants a freeloader.
Right.
But that's the overwhelming.
It's not always the case.
It's the overwhelming minority
Yeah.
that are trying to bilk the system in some way. The reality is some people just can't do it. And so places like this existed. Some worked better than others. But obviously, this tragedy, the only ray of hope from it is that it hasn't been repeated.
Yeah.
That facilities like that, they realized needed better care, that you don't want to be the next one. And thankfully that tragedy hasn't repeated.
You don't hear the phrase that often anymore, but being put in a poorhouse.
Yeah.
Usually was money related,
That was
right?
the poor farm, yeah.
But to me, that was always I'm milking my dad out of all the money. I'm always asking for money.
Yeah.
And he's, you're going to put me in the poorhouse.
That's right.
Because he's going to be poor. But I think it has that meaning to it.
That's exactly what it is. That's what the poor farm was. The poor
right.
house.
But I think we use that differently.
Yeah.
But now when I really thought about it and did this story, I'm oh my God, that's what it really meant.
It was a real thing. The grubber, working
almost
in the workhouse.
like you're making me crazy. You're going to put me in the poorhouse. Not you're milking me out of all my money.
Right.
But you also can't take care of yourself. No money, poorhouse.
By the way, if you're a woman and mid early 1800s and you were married and you didn't have children and your husband died, you weren't allowed to own land. So where do you go?
Right.
You go
to the
here.
poorhouse.
You go here because
farm.
this is nowhere else to go. You're elderly and you can't take care of yourself, and your family doesn't want to take care of you. They put you in the poorhouse. This was the nursing home, the asylum for people that had mental disabilities, drug addicts and alcoholics that were a mess, widows that weren't allowed to own land. What a mishmash of people.
Sure. And obviously not cared enough for.
Right. And so the widow, that to me, that's the worst. These women that weren't allowed to own land. My life was fine. Sure, I lost my husband. That stinks. But I had a home. We had a farm and everything else, but I'm not allowed to own it. So now I have to get all that taken from me and get put in here. And I can't imagine what that must have been like. Different times, hopefully not repeated.
Please hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to like and share. We'd also be most grateful if you posted a review for us. Those reviews really help others find us. Please also get involved. Join our New England Legends Facebook group, download our free New England Legends app in your app store, and email us with your story ideas. I mean, most of our story leads come from you.
We would like to thank Marv Anderson for lending his voice acting talents this week. Thank you to our Patreon patrons. Thank you so much to our sponsors. And our theme music is by John Judd.
Until next time, remember,
The bizarre is closer than you think.